Okay.
Whatever. Fine.
Yeah, I can do it in here. Yeah, I can do it from here.
Gracias a Dios. I talked to him about French, but I don't like French. That really hurt. Yeah, I'm still doing it now, but like, yeah, I learned French like a week ago. Right, just like, like, whatever. It's big deal, because like the language, so it's like, okay, let's see.
Why is it not showing up here?
Maybe like in videos.
But it should be showing up here too.
I will check.
Okay, here we go. Gosh. Okay.
That's not.
This thing is responding so
Maybe like in
slowly.
videos.
But it should be showing up here too. Edit video.
I will check. Is that a video?
Yeah. What? Whatever. Oh, here. Okay.
Yeah, it's a New York thing.
Oh, nice.
The views on the back. When you set it in, how come it is forward? Oh, perfect.
Still?
No, it's good.
I understand why.
It's just.
Yeah, I got it. Thank you. Makes sense. Really.
Okay. So it's on Zoom. The Zoom.
Yeah.
Where? There. Okay. Is it going to last if the plug is out of the wall?
If it's charged, yeah.
Yes. So then we could just put it like here. Okay. Perfect. All right. So you know what? Do you want to do attendance then? Okay. So let's send these around. I just pass one over to you over here. I'll send the rest of these around the other way. Okay. We're going to get into some pretty deep things today. We'll see how much of it we can fit in. So this week's Parsha is Parshas Lech Lecha. We're going to be talking about a very important mitzvah which happens in this week's Parsha, which is the mitzvah of the bris. Hang on, is this the wrong sikha? Yeah. Did I prepare the wrong one, or is this not the one that was supposed to be learning? I have a feeling this is. Okay, you know what? I already prepared the other one. I think it'll make more sense for me to just teach that outside rather than to teach this inside. Yeah, this is not the one that I was told to prepare. Okay, machne shows. Never mind. So we're going to be talking about the mitzvah of bris milah, aka circumcision. Now, Avram Avinu was told at the age of 99 that he has to circumcise himself. Thank you. Now, there are a few issues, let's say, a few things that need to be figured out over here. And one of them is that Avram Avinu already kept all the mitzvahs. The Gemara tells us, it says that the Avos, the forefathers, kimu kol Torah kula ad shelo nitna, they kept all the mitzvahs in the Torah even before the Torah was given, including rabbinic mitzvahs. So Avram Avinu had already been observing all the mitzvahs way before Hashem came and told him to have a bris. So if he kept all the other mitzvahs already, why didn't he keep that mitzvah too? Why hadn't Avram Avinu already circumcised himself? He was already keeping Shabbos, he was already eating kosher, etc., etc., etc. Why hadn't he already circumcised himself before this happened? If he knew that that was a mitzvah in the Torah, was going to be a mitzvah in the Torah, then he should have done it already if he observed all the other mitzvahs. Why is this one different? What didn't exist? Well, none of the mitzvahs.
Like it was the first time that this.
It was. But none of the other mitzvahs existed either. Hashem hadn't given the Torah yet.
This concept wasn't brought to this world yet. Like, I mean, others probably were because he went like to yeah. So probably they didn't do that yet, and like Hashem, it's like the first thing which should actually like work new to the works is like was a time.
Okay. But the question is why?
Or maybe it's like it's such a sign of like being part of the covenant, but like he was in such a holy place his whole life that he didn't need to. Like he was already,
so then why did he need to now?
like he created the covenant for the rest of the people.
Okay.
People before didn't do it because like they weren't like Abraham was supposed to be like a first Jew and he needed to be like a sign that something else starting. So like that was I'm wondering if that was like a sign that like that from here we start. Yeah.
Okay. That was before Yitzchak was born. Yitzchak was born a year after this. So we have a lot of good suggestions here. What we're going to do today is go deeper beneath the surface of all of this and understand why. So there are kind of two competing ideas that we're going to have to address and clarify. We're not going to clarify, well, they're not really competing per se, but they might seem like it at first glance. So one thing that we need to understand is, or there are a few things we need to understand. First of all, what we need to understand, or the first idea, the big idea, and then we're going to have to sort of clarify and resolve a couple of other ideas, how they fit in. But what it all boils down to is the impact of mitzvahs. What impact does it have when we fulfill a mitzvah? Now, when it comes to the giving of the Torah, when Hashem gave the Torah on Har Sinai and Mount Sinai, we have a question, and the question is the same, similar, is related to the question we are asking here. That they are like, before Yaakov went to Egypt, went to Mitzrayim, he sent Yehuda ahead to set up yeshiva so he could learn Torah. Now, how exactly that works technically is a separate discussion, but the bottom line is, it's very clear from Gemara, from Chazal, from the sages that Torah study already happened before the Torah was given. So somehow they were in touch with the Torah, they were in tune with it, they were already studying it, and they were already observing it and observing what Torah tells us. So what's the big deal about Hashem giving us the Torah and Har Sinai? Like nothing actually changed. They already knew the Torah, they were already studying the Torah, they were already observing the mitzvah. So what's the big deal? There was some thunder and lightning?
No, they became obligated, like they weren't before. So now
Good, very good. We're going to go in that exact direction. We're going to take it a step even deeper, which is connected to the obligation. So there's a midrash that says that the midrash is addressing specifically what changed when Hashem gave the Torah and Har Sinai. What happened? What was different before versus what was different after to the way it was before? And what the Gemara says is that what the midrash says, the midrash gives an analogy. It says, imagine there are two cities, and the king makes a decree and says the residents of these two cities are not allowed to interact. If you live in city number 1, you're not allowed to travel to city number 2. If you live in city number 2, you're not allowed to travel to city number 1. And so the Midrash says that's kind of like the terminology it uses is elyonim and tachtonim. That's the way things were between the material, physical reality and spiritual layers of reality. They don't mix, right? If I was to ask you, do angels exist? Most people are going to assume that, well, yeah, of course we believe that angels exist. And we do. That being said, it's possible for someone to say that angels do not exist and to be correct according to Torah, depending on what they mean. And what I mean by that is it depends by what we define or intend when we say the word exist. Because angels are not physical entities. We can't prove scientifically that angels exist, because science is the discipline of study of physical reality, and angels are not physical. So if when we say exist, what we mean is, do angels exist as far as the parameters that define physical reality are concerned? The answer is no. Angels are not made out of molecules. They're not made out of atoms. They're not made out of protons and electrons and neutrons. They're not made out of quarks. They're not made out of physical mass and physical energy. Angels are not physical entities. They don't physically exist. Now, as long as we accept and understand that the physical reality is only one of many layers of reality, then we can understand that the fact that something doesn't physically exist doesn't make it any less real. It just makes it non-physical. So if when you ask, do angels exist, you mean, are they physical entities? Do they physically exist? The answer is no, they don't. Right? The reason we don't see angels isn't because they're invisible. It's because they're not physical. They don't physically exist. They exist spiritually, and they're equally as real as that which does physically exist, but they're not physical entities. So the physical layer of reality and non-physical layers of reality are separate layers of reality. The parameters that define that which physically exists are completely different to the parameters that define spiritual existence. So existing in one means, by definition, not really existing in the other. So if something is physical, it's not spiritual. If something is spiritual, it's not physical. Because to exist in one layer of reality means to be defined by those parameters, which do not define the other layer of reality. So if you exist in one, you don't exist in the other. And so that's the nature. The nature of things is that physical and spiritual existence are mutually exclusive. And if you exist in one, you don't exist as far as the other is concerned. Physical layer of reality and spiritual layer of reality are mutually exclusive because they're defined by different parameters. And so that's why there's a pasuk that says, there's a verse that says, Shamayim Shamayim La Hashem. The heavens are for Hashem. The heavens are spiritually. And the physical layer of reality, the physical world, Hashem gave to us. So they're separate. They don't interact. As a result of that, when mitzvahs were done before Hashem gave us the Torah, the mitzvahs were observed, but the mitzvahs were unable to have a spiritual impact on the physical layer of reality. Because spiritual and physical are separate, they're mutually exclusive, and they can't naturally interact. So Shamayim LaHashem, the spiritual was spiritual, Haaretz Nasan Livnei Adam, physical was physical. We were able to carry out the act of mitzvahs in the physical world. We weren't able to cause an interaction between the spiritual and the physical as a result, because it's technically impossible as far as the laws of nature are concerned. And when I say laws of nature, I don't mean the laws of physics. I mean the laws of nature of all the layers of reality, which includes physics as well as, the physics of the spiritual layers of reality. Whatever that would be. It wouldn't be physics, because the word physics means laws of physical nature. But say that, what was that?
Well, it was a point of keeping mitzvah because here it's a physical deed which has an effect in spiritual. That's the definition of the mitzvah. It's a spiritual sign, not but physically done. But what was the point of doing mitzvahs if they were if they didn't do it, for example, tefillin, it's such a spiritual thing. It doesn't it's physically almost nothing. Doesn't mean anything. So what was the point, for example, of wrapping tefillin? If it's just wrapping around and for nothing and nothing happens, or?
So good question. The answer is that there were spiritual outcomes of the mitzvahs, but those spiritual outcomes remained in the spiritual layers of reality. There was the things that were generated spiritually by observing the mitzvahs were not able to come in and to be integrated into physical reality. So the mitzvahs did cause a spiritual outcome. Things did happen spiritually from the mitzvahs, but they stayed spiritual and they weren't able to interact with the world.
How it works.
How it works, or what that means.
Example, I don't know.
So when a mitzvah is fulfilled, the word mitzvah also means connection to Hashem. A mitzvah is something that Hashem said to do. And mitzvahs, the same way that when you follow a recipe, you get the product at the end, right? It's not a reward, it's an outcome. This recipe results in this product. So mitzvahs mitzvahs have spiritual effects. Mitzvahs result in spiritual outcomes. Things change spiritually when we fulfill a mitzvah. That's natural. What's also natural is that the spiritual changes that happen when we fulfill a mitzvah are not able to interact with the physical layer of reality because they're spiritual, and spiritual and physical can't interact. So let's say you're talking about the mitzvah of tefillin, with the story of Yaakov with the sticks, when he did the designs on the sticks and the sheep and that whole story. Zohar says that when Yaakov did that, he was effectively achieving the same spiritual outcome that we achieve when we put on tefillin. So what he did with those sticks was the same thing that we do when we put on tefillin, spiritually. The difference is that we have to treat tefillin with a tremendous amount of respect, and he didn't have to treat the sticks with respect. He could throw them out in the garbage when he was done. Because he did cause something spiritual to happen, the same thing that we cause spiritually when we put on tefillin. The difference is that when we put on tefillin, that spiritual thing that we cause actually becomes a part of the tefillin themselves. And with Yaakov, it didn't, because that spiritual thing couldn't interact with physical reality. It was separate things. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Why? Because Shamayim LaHashem, the spiritual is spiritual, it's for God and spirituality. Or it's not something made on the physical world we can interact with. And so the Midrash says, this analogy of a king, it says the residents of one city can't go to the other city, the residents of that city can't go to the first city. Spiritual and physical are separate, they can't interact. There's no interaction between them. Then what happened when Hashem gave the Torah? The analogy for that is that the king says, this decree is over. From now on, the residents of these two cities can travel back and forth and interact. So when Hashem gave the Torah, he said, from now on, the spiritual can interact with the physical can interact with the spiritual. From now on, Hashem removed the barrier that separates the physical and the spiritual. So when Hashem gave the Torah, we became able to fulfill mitzvahs, and by doing so, to cause spiritual outcomes to actually impact the physical world and to start to have an effect on the world. When we say that something's holy, right? A chumash, a sefer, a book of Torah is holy. What do we mean it's holy? It's an adjective. It describes something that's real, right? We don't put a chumash. It doesn't go on the floor. It doesn't go in the garbage. It doesn't go in the bathroom. Why not? not just because it says so. There's a reason why it says so. And the reason is that godliness has been integrated into the fabric of this physical object. The atoms, the molecules, the protons, electrons, and neutrons, the physical mass that makes up this object now has godliness integrated into it, bless you. And so it has to be treated with appropriate respect. Before Hashem gave the Torah, they weren't able to integrate divinity, godliness, spirituality into the fabric of physical reality. And the reason was that it's not a natural phenomenon. Naturally speaking, spirituality and physical are separate and they can't interact. That's just the way it is. So what changed? Why did it change? And this comes back to what you suggested before, Karen, which is that before Hashem gave the Torah, they were fulfilling the mitzvahs, but they were fulfilling the mitzvahs of their own initiative. Now, generally speaking, when we do something, the reason we do things because we're able to do them. Each of us has different abilities to do different things. Some of us are better at some things than others. Other people are better at different things. Right? If we would line up on, make a graph of every possible activity that a person could be engaged in, and we'd rank every person in the room on all of those activities, we'd all have different combinations of how good we are at different things. Why? Because we have different innate strengths, we have different innate talents, we have different innate skills. And those strengths, talents, skills, etc., give us abilities to do different things. So our ability, or the extent to which we can do something well, is proportional to our ability to do it. Make sense? So when we say the ability, what we mean is our innate predisposition to be able to do it based on our strengths, gifts, talents, skills, etc. The reason that what we can achieve is proportionate to our abilities is because we're achieving it through our abilities. Right? I'm just going to give a very simple, basic, crude example to illustrate. How do we lift an object up? How do you lift something up? The way that we lift something up is that we have a skeleton, we have bones that are connected to each other. We have muscles. Muscles are tissues in the body which have the ability to pull. And when a muscle that is connected to two different bones and it pulls and it shortens, it contracts, it makes those two bones move closer together, because if it's connected to both of them and it shortens, it pulls the bones together. Right? So lifting different things in different directions uses different muscles. So if the muscle contracting is what causes the thing to be lifted, the stronger the muscle's ability to contract, the heavier the object it's able to lift. Right? Because the lifting of the object is powered by the contraction of the muscle. Hence, when you say that someone is physically stronger, what you mean generally is, and there are multiple factors, but one of the big factors is the ability of that person's muscles to contract and generate force. And the stronger a person's muscles' ability to contract and pull against things, the bigger, the heavier the object they'll be able to lift. Why? Because it's the force generated by the muscle that's lifting the thing. So the amount that we can lift is proportionate to the strength and the ability of our muscles to generate force, because it's that ability in the muscle that's making the object be lifted. So it's the same thing. Anytime we do something naturally, the extent to which we can achieve it is proportionate to our ability to do it, our internal ability to do it. So when a human being is doing something with, anytime a human being, and it's not only humans, but we're talking about humans, so we'll just keep it to that to limit the scope of the conversation and make it less complicated. The ability, anytime a human being is doing something with their abilities, then their achievements, their ability to achieve is proportionate to the abilities that they have innately. Well, not necessarily innately, it could be that they've developed and built them up also, but that is proportional to their internal abilities. Now, no person can do things that are technically impossible. To cause that which physically exists to interact with that which does not physically exist is technically impossible. And no human being is capable of making that happen. It's technically impossible. So when someone is fulfilling mitzvahs with their own abilities, they are not going to be able to cause a spiritual outcome to become integrated into physical reality, because spiritual and physical don't exist in the same chart, and it's technically impossible. And that's what they were doing before Hashem gave the Torah. They were performing the mitzvahs of their own initiative with their own abilities. And therefore, the outcomes they were able to generate were limited to that which they were able to do, which does not include the technically impossible. Hashem gave us the Torah, and this is the key word, gave. It's not that we now had the Torah which we didn't have before, because we did. Torah study already happened before. Observance of mitzvahs already happened before. What changed was matan Torah. Right? In Shavuos, in davening, what do we say? Zman matan Torah seino, the time of the giving of the Torah. That's the key. Hashem gave us the Torah. Hashem instructed us to do these things. The moment that Hashem instructed us to do something, we're now acting on Hashem's initiative and with Hashem's merits. And we now have the power of Hashem's instruction, Hashem's commandment in our actions, which means we are now acting with Hashem's abilities, not only with our own. Does Hashem have the ability to bring the physical and the non-physical together? Of course. Hashem created the rules that keep them separate. Hashem created and defines the laws of nature. Hashem's not limited by them or to them. So when Hashem says, I am instructing you to fulfill this mitzvah, you are now fulfilling this mitzvah on Hashem's terms, with Hashem's ability. Hashem has the ability to bring them together. So the thing that changed when Hashem gave us the Torah was not our ability to learn Torah, because we already did. It was not our ability to fulfill mitzvahs, because we already did. It was our ability to have our Torah and our mitzvahs actually become integrated into the fabric of physical reality and change the nature of physical reality, bringing divinity and godliness into it. Before Hashem gave the Torah, you could read from a chumash and throw it in the garbage, because the spiritual outcome of Torah study, or even the fact that it was written on the paper, the fact that Hashem's name was written on the paper was like, okay, and it's just a shape of ink. It's like there's some ink on a paper. So what? So it happens to be in a particular shape. Whoop-de-doo. Because naturally, that's the way it is. Right? And if people could actually claim that and say, I don't understand why you have to treat this with respect. At the end of the day, it's just paper and ink, like big deal. And if you're going to be speaking strictly, technically, physically, that does make sense. And that's why before the Torah was given, that was actually the way it was. What changed is that now that Hashem gave us the Torah and we're doing it on Hashem's terms with Hashem's strength, when we write a pasuk from Chumash on a piece of paper with ink, that paper and ink has now actually had godliness and divinity integrated into the fabric, into the molecules themselves. And so it has to be treated with respect. The molecules that this paper and ink are made out of have now had godliness introduced and integrated into them. That couldn't happen before the Torah was given, because before the Torah was given, we were doing it of our own initiative, with our own abilities, which means the extent to which we could achieve was proportionate to our abilities. We don't have the ability to do the impossible, so we couldn't. The only reason we can do it now is because we're doing it at Hashem's instruction, at Hashem's command, with Hashem's abilities and Hashem's merits and strengths. Question?
Does that mean that Abraham didn't have the strength to give himself a bris earlier than 90?
It wouldn't mean that he didn't have the strength to give him a bris. It would mean that he wouldn't have had the ability to have a spiritual impact on his body by having a bris.
And he did have a spiritual impact for other mitzvot on
No.
his own?
He had a spiritual impact through other mitzvahs, but the spiritual impact didn't affect physical reality. It remained strictly spiritual.
So by him having a bris, was it kind of like a rebirth because now it's like babies who have it, like so close to the
It
birth?
definitely was.
Okay.
So now, what does this have to do with that question? Why did Avram wait for Hashem to tell him to have a bris when he kept all the other mitzvahs himself? So there's this idea that Chazal say that Maisa Ava Simon Lavoni, the actions of the fathers, Simon could mean it's a sign or an indicator for us about how we are to behave, but it's more than just that. Signposts give us the ability to get to places we couldn't achieve, we couldn't reach without them. And part of what they are a metaphor for, part of what a simon, a sign, is a metaphor for, is the fact that, and this is what I was getting at when we have two things that seem to be almost to a degree contradictory or opposite, or at least in tension, T-E-N-S-I-O-N, not intention. They seem to be in tension with each other, is that the forefathers also were incredibly great people. And is that me? Does anyone know whose this is?
Probably she's looking for.
Do you want to take it down, Tom? Or whatever. She'll find it eventually. That was a reminder for her to knock on the classes that are supposed to be finishing now. So where were we at? Right. So when Avram and Yitzchak and Yaakov did mitzvahs, they paved the way, right? Paving the way is an expression. What does it mean to pave the way? Okay, so let's say, for example, you go for a walk, you go for a hike in the jungle, right? If you go for a hike in a place that no one's ever been before, you've got to try to either figure out or just decide where you're going to go, right? But if you're going on a hike that thousands of people have already gone on and they've all gone in the same way, you can see where people walk, you can see where the path is because people have walked, and some of the branches have been broken. You can go a different way if you want, but the bottom line is if you go this way, people have stepped there, but they've broken the branches, the mud has been packed down, it's a little bit dense, it's a little bit less slippery, right? So once people have walked a certain path, they've paved the way. They've made the way more passable. They've made it easier to go that way. So when Avram and Yitzchak and Yaakov did mitzvahs, when they did things, when they stood up to challenges, that had an impact, and that paved the way and made and sort of created a situation in which we would be more able to do the same things later. We have a big problem though, because if when they did mitzvahs, they did it of their own initiative, and therefore they didn't integrate spirituality into the physical reality, then that would mean that we're missing out on the benefit. They didn't pave the way for us to be able to integrate spirituality into physical reality. And we're not going to have the same ability to do that we would have if they had paved the way. And that's why bris had to work out the way that it did. And there are a few things that are going to come together here. Had Avram Avinu kept all the mitzvos of his own initiative, then he would never have been able to integrate spirituality into physical reality, because it's a technical impossibility. And we would not have had the benefit of someone of Avram's caliber having done that before us to pave the way for us to do it. That's why there had to be one mitzvah that Avram Avinu waited for Hashem to tell him to do it. Once Hashem told him to do it, he now became able to integrate spirituality into physical reality. When Avram Avinu kept Shabbos, he caused spiritual outcomes. It didn't affect the world. Why? Because he did it of his own initiative. It's not possible to affect the world ourselves. When Avram Avinu ate kosher, didn't affect the world. It had a spiritual outcome, but it didn't affect the world because he was doing it of his own initiative. All the other mitzvahs, 612 mitzvahs that Avraham Avinu did, 619 actually. There's 613 scriptural mitzvahs, so mitzvahs d'oraisa, and there are 7 mitzvahs d'rabbanan. There are 7 mitzvahs that the rabbis initiated. And total of 620 mitzvahs. Yafi, you want your phone? It's here. And the Gemara does say that they also, the Avos, the forefathers, before the Torah was given, they kept not only the mitzvahs d'oraisa, not only the scriptural mitzvahs, obligations, but also the rabbinic ones. So out of 620 total mitzvahs, Avraham Avinu had already kept 619 of them, of his own initiative, which means he was doing 619 mitzvahs, which were causing a tremendous spiritual impact, but none of that spiritual impact was able to affect physical reality. So Avraham Avinu waited for one mitzvah. He said, in order for Avraham Avinu to pave the way for us to integrate spirituality into the physical reality, he had to do it himself. And the only way he could do that himself was if Hashem would tell him to do it. So there had to be one mitzvah that Avraham Avinu waited for Hashem to tell him to do it. Once Hashem told him to do it, now he did that mitzvah on Hashem's merit, at Hashem's command, with Hashem's strength. And as a result of that, Avraham Avinu was able to impact the world and integrate divinity and godliness and spirituality into physical reality by fulfilling that mitzvah. And this is what Matan Torah is about. What happened at Matan Torah was the act of Hashem giving it to us, Hashem instructing us, which means that now we fulfill mitzvahs on Hashem's terms, with Hashem's ability, with the strength of Hashem's commandment. And if you think about it, not just if you think about it, it's a fact, but we could discuss it. The word mitzvah, I think we may have discussed this recently. The word mitzvah in Hebrew, what does the word mitzvah mean? The basic common translation is commandment, an instruction, a commandment. Mitzvah means something we are commanded to do. Right. It also means connection. The Gemara uses the word letzavos, means to connect. And the truth is that the two go hand in hand.
So Matan Torah gave us the ability to connect the spiritual and the physical.
And to connect our bodies and our environment to Hashem. Why? Because Hashem commanded it. And if you think about it, when it comes to giving people gifts, a lot of people go very wrong. Right? You see something and you're like, oh, wow, that's so cool. I would love to get that as a gift. I'm going to buy that as a gift for someone. Now, it's something that people make fun of a lot. People talk about the gifts they get at certain times and, the gifts that their mother and grandmother buy them for their birthday. And they're like, are you serious? Like, what's the point of this as if I have any need for it right now? People mean well, but if you really think about it, right? If you buy a gift for someone because you think it's a cool gift. Now, look, sometimes we don't know. Sometimes we don't know what someone's going to appreciate. And so the best we can do is use our own judgment based on what we think. But let's say that you know someone well enough that you should know what they're going to appreciate. Right? Let's say you've been best friends with someone for 15 years. You should know what they appreciate and what they're going to enjoy getting as a gift. If you know someone that well and you buy them a gift that they know that they're not going to really appreciate, and that therefore they know that you bought because you think it's cool, knowing that they're not going to think it's cool or nice or whatever it is that they're not going to appreciate, ultimately the message that you're actually giving them when you give this gift is, oh, this is an opportunity to give a gift, so I decided to think about myself. That's ultimately the message you're giving, if you should know better, right? Like I said, the reality is obviously reality is many shades of gray. And a lot of times we might not have the information. We don't necessarily know. So we do our best. But if there is a relationship in which both of you know that you know what the person likes and you know what they'd appreciate as a gift, and you both know that you just chose to get something that you think is valuable, that you know that they don't think is valuable, and you got that as a gift for them, what you've ultimately told them is, here's a gift that illustrates that I was thinking about myself and I wasn't thinking about you. Right? Because if I was thinking about the person, now obviously you were thinking about them to some extent because you thought to get them a gift, right? Let's not, completely dismiss it. But if you buy someone a gift that you know that they will appreciate, and they know that you don't appreciate this yourselves, and they know that you think this is ridiculous and has no value and has no point, and they know that despite the fact that you think this thing has no value and no point, you went out and you bought it for them because you know that they value it. Think about the statement that makes. What that tells the person is that you were thinking about them to the extent that you bought something that you find valueless because you know that they find it valuable, and you wanted to do something for them because it's valuable to them. And what happens to your connection to someone when you do that? It gets deeper, it gets stronger, it gets more powerful, it becomes longer lasting. Why? Because you've done something that illustrates that you put them first, that they are your priority, that they are important to you, that their needs are important to you, that their wants and interests are important to you. So by definition, a commandment is a means of connecting. If I do something that Hashem said to do because Hashem said to do it, that strengthens my connection to Hashem, regardless of what the thing that I did is. The reason that it connects me to Hashem, first and foremost, is not because of the thing itself, but because of the fact that I did what Hashem instructed me to do. Right? When you buy a gift for someone that you don't appreciate, but they do, the reason that they now appreciate this so much, and the reason that you have deepened your connection to them and strengthened it and made it longer lasting, is not because of the value of the thing that you bought them. I mean, there's that to a degree. But the reason that this gift just became so valuable and so powerful, in this specific instance where the person knows that you don't find it valuable, and they know that the reason you bought it was because you know that they do find it valuable, right? The impact of this gift doesn't come from the gift itself. It comes from the fact that you went and got something that shows that you were thinking about them and that their needs and wants and interests were important enough to you that you acted upon them, right? That's what's really making the impact here. So the connection that you're forming with this person, or strengthening and deepening with this person, is not coming from the value of what you're giving them per se. It's coming from the fact that you did something that shows that them and their interests and wants and needs are your priority, and you put that first and you paid attention to it. And it was important to you. That's the thing that strengthens your connection, right? And it's like, it's not quite a perfect metaphor what I was thinking of, right? But generally, in any relationship, ultimately, the thing that's going to make the strongest contribution to the quality and depth and strength and longevity of the relationship is the extent to which the various parties in the relationship, it could be two, it could be more, depending on the kind of relationship, it could be a group, right? If you have a group of people working on something together, and every person in the group is dedicated to the objective of the group and puts the objective of the group first, that team is going to be exceptionally powerful. And what that team will have the ability to achieve will be far greater than what one would expect based on the abilities of the people in the group, because the unification around the objective of the group and the dedication to the group itself brings incredible power and strength and value to the group. In a, two-person relationship, and it's true of friendships, and it's true of marriages, and every other kind of relationship. It's true in business relationships. The extent, or the more each of the people in the relationship puts the other person before themselves and puts the other person's wants and needs before their own, the more powerful and rewarding and long-lasting the relationship will be. Now, it's very important, just as the fine print here, to think that that doesn't mean that a healthy relationship means treating yourself like a piece of garbage and just, always and only focusing on the other person. Treating yourself like garbage is never healthy, and it doesn't help anybody. But what it does mean is, whenever you consider something, stop and think, what would the other person's perspective on this be, and what do they need, and what would they want out of this situation? And to remember that this is a relationship, and that there are two of us, and that if I really care about that person as much as I claim to, or as much as I think I do, I'm going to consider and to put their needs at the top of the list of priorities, and I'm going to consider that and take that into account, maybe even above and before my own wants and needs. Yes, it doesn't mean I discount my wants and needs. It just means, and this is, doing this in reality is less simple than it sounds, but it's a process, and it becomes much more simple over time if we do it consistently, is to putting the other person's needs before our own doesn't mean forgetting about our needs. It means when we weigh them up and calculate them and measure them, we give the other person's wants and needs even higher priority than our own. And if both people in a relationship make an effort to do that to the degree that they can on a consistent basis, that relationship will be invincible. And not only invincible in terms of lasting forever, because there could be relationships that last that, like, everyone would be better off if it hadn't lasted. But that will be a relationship that will bring unimaginable meaning and joy to the people involved in it over time. It's not necessarily something that we're naturally wired to do, but it's something that will bring us more benefit and meaning and deep joy than anything that we are wired to do will ever bring us. Why? Because when we're doing things for other people, think about it. When someone does something for you, and if you're deciding with someone about a certain course of action, what should we do? Let's make it tangible so it's not vague and it's real. Very simple, very basic. You're going out with a friend to lunch, and you're going out ultimately to hang out, and you have very, very different tastes in food. And the person you're going out with makes a reservation at a place that serves food that you like, and you know that they don't particularly enjoy that kind of food, and you didn't ask them to, and you know that they chose to make that reservation, and they made that reservation happily, and they're excited to go out with you to this place to eat. And what you now know is that this person is excited to go to this place to eat because they know that I'm going to enjoy it. Think about what that does for your friendship and connection with this person. Right? You know that they wanted to do this, and they did it happily because they know that you like it, and it makes them happy to do things that you like. Imagine a friendship where both people are always behaving that way. Imagine how powerful and meaningful that relationship is going to be, and how much it's going to enhance the lives of both people involved. And when one person behaves that way, it makes the other person want to behave that way. Right? So what's the thing that's making this so valuable and strengthening the connection? The fact that you are behaving based on the other person's interests. That will do more for your connection to a person than anything else ever could. So the two meanings of the word mitzvah are connected. The reason why we connect to Hashem when we fulfill a mitzvah is because it's a commandment. We are doing something because Hashem asked us to do it. Hashem told us to do it. That by definition connects us to Hashem and strengthens and deepens our connection to Hashem. When we do something because Hashem said so, that gives a power to connect that is technically impossible when we do it of our own initiative. And because Avraham Avinu wanted or needed to pave the way for us to be able to do that, there needed to be at least one mitzvah in which Avraham Avinu was instructed by Hashem to do it, and he was doing it with the power of Hashem's commandment and Hashem's instruction rather than just by himself. And that's why he waited. He kept all the other mitzvahs, but for this one mitzvah, he waited until Hashem told him to do it, so that he would have this ability to pave the way for us to integrate godliness into physical reality by doing things at Hashem's instruction rather than of his own initiative.
So is it cheating when we dive in and ask for Hashem to align our will to his so that we can also be happy doing in a selfish way?
What I would say is it would be super lame if we just dove into Hashem and asked him to do that for us and didn't put any effort to achieve it on our own. But to work on something and to ask Hashem to bless our efforts and to help us succeed, that's what it's all about. That's where it's at. There's nothing wrong with that at all. Right? To ask Hashem to do something and to not put any effort in and sit, with our feet up on the couch watching Netflix and wait for Hashem to do it for us, like, that's kind of lame. That's a bit pathetic. Look, there are also obviously things in life that are just, it's not our call. We don't have the ability to do it, and we can and should ask Hashem to gift us with things if they're not things we can do. But if there are things that we can and should be working on, and we expect Hashem, I'm going to dive in and ask Hashem to do this for me, and I'm just going to go about my merry way and wait for it. You know what? Don't hold your breath waiting.
I understand, but I think I meant like coming from a good place, like saying that for my own standards, my own strength, like I know I'll be able to do this if in my own like human scale, I feel like it's my own will. So I ask that Hashem aligns, like makes my will just a reflection of his, because it's sometimes easier to do just for like short term, like not necessarily understanding how important it is.
So is the question that you're saying, let's say there's a certain objective that I want to achieve, and I know I technically have the ability to achieve it, I just don't have the will to achieve it. So I'm asking Hashem to grant me that will so that I will be able to make use of my abilities.
Yeah. Or
That didn't sound very convincing, but yeah.
No, just
I'm not getting it.
sometimes like mitzvot can be like challenging, right? And so like davening to ask for like that besimcha aspect, like feeling like it came out of my own volition, even though I know that's an illusion because I know that it's his commandment.
Well, it doesn't necessarily need to be illusion. Again, I would say ideally what we should do is ask Hashem, for the gift of simcha and the gift of having an aligned will, whilst also working to achieve it ourselves. And that's when the magic really happens. So the Frierdiker Rebbe gives an analogy of generating produce on a farm. If you want to grow produce on a farm, you need two things. You need to plow the land, you need to sow the seeds, you need to do the things you need to do, and you need to have rain. Now, if you do all the work and there just happens to be a drought, it's not going to be any crops. If you plow the ground and plant the seeds and do everything right and there's just no rain, no crops. You know how else there's no crops? If the exact perfect amount of rain falls at exactly the right timing and the fertility of the soil is absolutely perfect, everything's perfect, but you never planted any seeds, there's also not going to be any crops. Right, so the work and the planting is a metaphor for our effort to try and achieve these outcomes, and then the blessing of Hashem is the rain. So ideally, if we want to have the outcome, if we want to have the produce, we do both, and it's a good thing to ask Hashem for help in the things that we're putting effort into. It absolutely is. We can and we should. What we shouldn't do is to ask Hashem to grant us things that we do have the ability to work on achieving ourselves and to not put in the effort to achieve it. And now, you know what the reality is, again, reality always has many, many shades of gray. You know, sometimes like we technically have the ability, but we're really just really stuck inside, and we've tried to care and wanted to care. You know, it's like these things can go very deep. And, you know, sometimes we're just stuck and we just say, look, you know what, Hashem, I really like, I'm trying, I'm stuck. I need some help. We can do that too. But to not even bother trying and just ask Hashem to help us is missing half the picture. But we definitely can and should ask Hashem. We can and should ask Hashem to help us succeed at aligning our will to His. And we can and should ask Hashem to help us, you know, succeed in achieving a state of simcha, etc. What we shouldn't do is ask Hashem to grant it to us and to not need to work on it at all. Can we do that? We can. It's not ideal, and it's unlikely to have ideal results. You know, like with everything, the bottom line is when we achieve things through putting in the work, the outcome and the product is just immeasurably more valuable at the end of the day. Now, that doesn't mean we should try to achieve it without asking Hashem for help. What it does mean is we shouldn't just ask Hashem to grant it for us without us putting in effort. Because even if we get quote unquote lucky, maybe, the result's just not going to be the same that it would have been if we would have put in the effort. So it's not actually that lucky after all. Make sense? Does that answer the question? Yeah? Sure. So now, we've got to tie things up. Is that clock correct? Yes, it is, ish. So now, without getting too graphic, it makes a lot of sense. So at this point, what we have is a case that Avram needed to save one mitzvah that he would wait for Hashem to tell him to do it. So Avram's going to keep 619 mitzvahs, and he's going to keep one mitzvah and wait for Hashem to tell him to do it, so he could do it on Hashem's command with Hashem's ability and strength, and have the ability to integrate divinity into the physical reality so that he could pave the way for us in that specific regard. Why this mitzvah? And the reason why this mitzvah is very simple. This is the only mitzvah that has a permanent, visible impact on the body. This mitzvah causes a permanent, tangible change in the body. And that illustrates the whole point of Avram Avinu waiting. When we do mitzvahs now, every time we do a mitzvah, we are actually changing our bodies. Our bodies are becoming more saturated with divinity, with godliness. Our bodies become more godly with every mitzvah that we do. The mitzvahs we do actually change the state of our bodies. The mitzvahs we do change the state of our environment. The mitzvahs that we do change the state of reality. They have a real impact, and things are not the same after a mitzvah as they were before. The thing is that with most mitzvahs, those changes are not tangible and they're not visible. The reason that Avram Avinu waited for Hashem to command him one mitzvah was that by Hashem commanding him to do that mitzvah, as opposed to him doing it voluntarily, that gave Avram Avinu the ability to change the world forever through mitzvahs, to change his body forever through mitzvahs, to change the environment forever through at least that mitzvah. And by doing so, he paved the way for us to do that with our mitzvahs. So which mitzvah would be ideal for that to be the choice of that mitzvah? The one mitzvah that illustrates that there is a permanent, real change in the body through doing a mitzvah. And circumcision achieves that in a way that no other mitzvah does. Yeah.
Also, Hashem didn't tell him don't do circumcision until I tell you.
Right. He just waited for Hashem to tell him.
But why exactly this one?
So the reason this one is because when a person's circumcised, there's a permanent change in their body. And so that's an example of the fact that when we do it, every time we do a mitzvah that Hashem told us to do, we bring godliness into our bodies. We make a permanent change in our body forever. It's not tangible, it's not visible, but it's real. So the change that happens in a person's body when they are circumcised illustrates the fact that when a mitzvah is done, it causes a permanent change in a body. And because the reason why Avraham Avinu waited to do a mitzvah was to give him the ability to do it at Hashem's command so that he could cause a permanent spiritual change in his body as a result of doing the mitzvah, but not a spiritual change up there, a spiritual change that actually was integrated with his body and caused a permanent change in his body. That was the point of waiting. The point of waiting was so he could do it with Hashem's command, so that his mitzvah would actually have an impact and change his body. So the mitzvah that was chosen, that he waited for to do that with, was the mitzvah that illustrates the concept of a permanent change in a body through doing a mitzvah, which is circumcision. We actually finished on time.